Let's take a step back to the long, distant past. The forgotten year of 2020. Yeah, this is actually a lot more recent than I wish it was. But believe it or not, it is 2022 now, even though I'll concede it doesn't feel that way. It feels like every year has been the same since about that time. Although, if you ask me, it's been the same year since, like, 2013, as far as I've been concerned. So there's that. Anyway, I don't feel like many of you need a refresher, but in case you do, March 2020 was a rough month, for a lot of people, because that was when the coronavirus pandemic decided it was a really nice time to just freak out and attempt to kill everybody. That's just a thing viruses sometimes do, on occasion. It's something that cannot be predicted that well or even controlled that well unless everybody is on the same page, and I don't know if this was clear to you, but not everyone was on the same page when it came to how to deal with the pandemic at all, in any way. It varied between countries, it varied between states in America, it varied between political factions. Everyone was too busy arguing with each other to actually take the time to realize, oh, right, this is a thing that can definitely kill a bunch of people. Maybe we should stop for a second and try to come to a consensus, which is a word that I don't believe any political party actually knows the meaning of in the modern day, and I can't stress that enough. Although it really hasn't changed that much within the last century looking at history, and I don't really think it matters what country you're from. This isn't just an American thing. Let's be real. Even if you have a multi-party system, they always act like this. They never want to agree on anything. They just want exactly what they want at any given second, right now, at this moment, and occasionally the thing that they're talking about and being stubborn about is a thing that may get a bunch of people killed. But the reason why all this actually matters to the story is it does involve the reasoning behind why the engineer decided to intentionally derail his own train. Now, stories in fiction of crazy engineers intentionally driving their trains off the tracks like madmen is a not uncommon trope. I mean, it's not used super prevalently, but it's not something we haven't seen before. But it doesn't happen outrageously often in real life. This isn't the first time it's happened. It has occurred where someone just snaps and does something nutso, but this is the most recent example that I'm aware of, and is one of the more ludicrous attempts. The engineer's name is Eduardo Moreno, a California resident in the Los Angeles area. Now, reference, California as a state was one of the earliest to adopt shutdown procedures. They were one of the quickest to shut everything off and try to let the pandemic simmer down and, you know, promote masking up if you have to go out, you know, social isolation, things like that. And not everyone responded well to these new proceedings. Now, where I live, there was a shutdown as well, which wasn't quite as soon as California, but it still came. And I'll be real, I handled it pretty well, but I'm an introvert. Like, the second everyone's like, well, you have to stay inside and don't talk to anybody, I'm like, oh no! I'm so upset by that. I definitely wasn't planning on doing that already. But for other people, this was very, very hard to deal with. But I think in terms of registering first world problems, this might be one of them, where all of a sudden, like, the daily, like, fun activities you might do, like go to the bar with your friends and little simple things like that, like, people got, like, freaked out that they couldn't do these things, and in my head, I'm like, is this really the priority for you? I don't get it. And Eduardo was one of these people who apparently just couldn't take the notion of having to stay inside and not go out. And it's weird, too, because he was also an essential worker, because he is a locomotive engineer. At the time, he was working for the Pacific Harbor Line, or PHL. PHL is a very, very small freight line over in the Los Angeles area of California. They're connected to BNSF as well as Union Pacific. But as the name Harbor Line may suggest, their main focus is moving containers from the ships that come into the Pacific harbors to other trains or trucks that take them further inland. And that's an essential job. That's one element of society that couldn't shut down, so Eduardo didn't actually lose his job like a lot of people did, so he was honestly in a pretty decent spot. Like, yeah, he couldn't go out and have a little bit of fun every so often. He had to stay inside with his family because he is a married man with 2 children, but still, he kept his job, so, you know, he wasn't really that bad off. But Eduardo smelled something fishy. about this whole situation. Was the coronavirus even a real thing? I mean, a bunch of people have died from it, but that could be anything! But I did my own research on the internet from people who aren't actually doctors or educated at all, and they're saying that this virus is a man-made product. Oh no, actually, it's not even real at all. This is about a government takeover. I'm on to you. Me, Eduardo. I know exactly what's going on. I know everything. And by everything, I mean he knew nothing. Based on his own admission, he actually only suspected there was something else going on. And the biggest suspicion, the thing that really pushed him over the line, the one thing that he just could no longer tolerate, was the most suspicious ship, the shadiest vessel ever conceived by the United States Navy. That's right. I'm of course talking about the USNS Mercy. Really, the Mercy? That was your concern? The Mercy is a hospital ship. The Mercies have always been hospital ships. The Mercy, for reference, is a massive ship that was actually originally constructed as a civilian oil tanker. It was purchased by the Navy to be converted into a large-scale floating hospital vessel, and that is exactly what it does. The Mercy and her sister, the Comfort, serve as kind of a beacon of hope for a lot of people because they have been deployed not just in war situations, more often in humanitarian situations, in major crises. Remember how I talked about the worst rail disaster ever that was a result of that 2004 tsunami that killed just so many people? Well, among the many things the Mercy has done was actually go out to the area as a part of Operation Unified Assistance and help the injured and the sick as a mobile hospital platform. Combined, she provided over 107,000 patient services with a crew of both civilian and military personnel. The Mercy is not like a threatening vessel at all. The opposite. Really the opposite. Now you may be saying, oh no, that's just what they want you to think. The Mercy doesn't even carry offensive weaponry. The Geneva Conventions literally say that they can't because of what she is. She can only carry defensive weapons, so like small arms if they get boarded or something by a hostile threat. Beyond that, the Mercy and the Comfort are the least likely vessels in the United States military to conduct anything hostile. Seriously. The opposite. Eduardo, why? Well, he did explain what he was thinking. At the time the Mercy was docked at the port of Los Angeles because of the coronavirus pandemic. The Mercy was not actually going to be treating coronavirus patients. The Mercy was actually going to be treating regular patients so that the permanent brick-and-mortar hospitals in the city could handle COVID-19 patients, okay? Just so we're clear. So there weren't any COVID patients on the Mercy. And in fact, the Comfort, the Mercy's sister, like I mentioned, was in New York City doing the exact same thing. The concern at the time was that the hospitals would become overwhelmed, and while that didn't happen, at least not then, happened later, but not then, that was why the Mercy and the Comfort were doing this particular job. That makes sense. You know, the Mercy is just a floating hospital. That's literally all she is for. And I really need to stress this right now. But Eduardo believed that no. He believed the Mercy was part of a conspiracy, or possibly a government takeover. And he thought the Mercy was suspicious and not what they say it's for. Which is great and all, but what is it for then, Eduardo? Eduardo, Betty boy, my homie, my main man, family lamb, my dog. What's it for? If it's not for treating patients, what is the floating hospital for? You know, Eduardo, as far as I know, I've been through a whole slew of sources regarding his quotes and anything. He never not once explained what he actually thought it was for. He just said that he thought it was for something else. Which, okay. A government takeover? Well, A, if you're going to do a government takeover, the Mercy is like the last ship you want to start with, because it doesn't have offensive weaponry. That's A. B, government takeover of what? You realize the government, by definition, already has taken over, right? Like, the government controls that's what it's for. The roads, the infrastructure, like, it's all government regulated. Like, even in a free market capitalist economy, the government still, like, Eduardo, what are you talking about? Okay, so Eduardo had to do something about this. It was imperative that he the hero of the day. Wake people up, as he said, to what was really going on. Because if we can't go to the bars for like 2 months, then what kind of world are we even living in? This isn't my America anymore. So, on March 31st, 2020, Eduardo went to work like a completely normal person who definitely was not constantly listening to the voices in his head. Absolutely not. On that day, he was assigned to drive engine number 21, a model MP20B-3 diesel-electric locomotive. They're hood units, as you can see, and you'd probably mistake them for EMDs, because let's be real, a lot of modern diesels, especially in America, look very, very, very similar, but it's not. It's an MP20B-3 built by MPI. And as with many, many hood units, these are absolutely fine diesel-electric locomotives. There is really nothing notable to say about them other than the fact that they do their jobs perfectly well. They are totally fine. So, nothing was wrong with engine number 21, except for the little itsy-bitsy problem that it was currently being driven by a totally unhinged madman who thought that the hospital ship in front of him at the dock that he was working on was in fact part of a conspiracy based on exactly nothing except his own somehow making sense to him thoughts that would make no sense to any other sane individual on the planet. So Eduardo had a few options here. He's looking at the Mercy, the source of his conspiracy thoughts, the source of everything. He knows something's going on even though he doesn't know what it is. So what can he, a simple locomotive engineer, do? Did you say nothing and go home and wait out the quarantine parameters like every other normal human being in the country at that point? Oh no. No, you're not gonna do that, Eduardo. What instead you're gonna do is throw your diesel into maximum thrust and plow into a dead-end siding through a concrete barrier, then through a steel barrier, then through a chain link fence, then slide through a parking lot, then slide across another gravel lot, and then smash through a second chain link fence, and then stop without actually striking the boat. Yeah, see, Eduardo totally failed, because he isn't very smart when it came to this. Like, according to him himself, this was a completely impulsive thing that he just did, because that's reasonable, you know, of course. And unlike in my last video about a train hitting a boat, the Mercy was a fair bit of distance away from where the track ended. Too far for this locomotive, which was only pulling one container car at that point, to have any hope of reaching it, even at full speed. Could he have accomplished this with a larger train? Maybe, but it's hard to say. I mean, for every car that went off the track, that's more drag you're taking on the train, so it would get to a point where the weight would stop being a benefit and more of a hindrance. And even if you could say he could touch it, he probably wouldn't do much damage. I mean, this is a Navy vessel, and it was built as an oil tanker. The Mercy's a sturdy ship, and he would never have reached it with any large amount of speed. But that wasn't really his plan. See, Eduardo explained he just wanted to wake people up to what was going on. He wanted them to see the ship for what it was. And what actually ended up happening was people just saw an absolutely unhinged man attempt to ram a boat with a train. Like, that's all anyone took from the story, because there was nothing else to take. The Mercy really was there just to be a floating hospital. There was no conspiracy going on with it. And I'm sure I'll still get commenters being like, actually, I know the truth. Look, no you don't. You're wrong. I'm telling you that. You're wrong right now. And even if you are that kind of person, you know, even if you disagree about the handling of the pandemic or anything like that, let's put it this way, and I think we can all agree on this point. There is a very major, major difference between protesting outside of your respective Capitol buildings or wherever you're at, you know, in response to the quarantine or whatever it is, with signs held up and stuff like that. Like, that's one thing. That is your constitutional right. There's a very, very wide gap between doing that and trying to slam a Navy ship with a train. Not the same thing. At all. Very, very distinct difference. This is an act of terrorism, which is hilarious because he wasn't technically charged with that because he kind of totally failed. He was charged with train wrecking, which is kind of categorized under terrorism, but you don't actually say it that way, even though, like, my argument here is he basically attempted to bomb a hospital, is really what he did. So, if someone had actually taken a bomb into an actual real hospital and failed, would they then be charged the same way? because as a train wrecker, he could only ever get a maximum of 20 years. And to me, he either belongs in the clink for longer than that, or he belongs in a freaking mental hospital, because there is something wrong with this man. This isn't a normal response to this kind of stress. As for engine number 21, well, I haven't been able to determine exactly what happened to it after the incident. Though, the damage, from what we know, was fairly minor, so it probably was fixed and put back into service. But the most recent picture I can find of this locomotive is from before the incident, so either it's still being repaired, or they did decide to scrap it ultimately. But it only took damage to the front truck as well as the fuel tank, so it wouldn't necessarily be unfixable. And these MPI diesels aren't that old, so I can't imagine it would be scrapped, but it's tough to say. I can't find any concrete proof it is still being used. And no one was hurt during the incident either. Eduardo was arrested. There just happened to be an LA patrolman nearby who witnessed the incident and held him at gunpoint. The Mercy was untouched and, was fine. And the only real damage was infrastructure and the fact that Engine 21 did suffer a fuel leak that had to be cleaned up by specialized hazardous materials personnel because diesel fuel is corrosive and gross and you don't want that just laying around. Eduardo also did not actually plan this attack. According to him, it really was genuinely impulsive. In a quote to the officer who arrested him, he said,
"You only get this chance once. The whole world is watching. I had to. People don't know what's going on here. Now they will. At night, they turn off the lights and they don't let anyone in. I'm going to expose this to the world. When was the last time you went to Dodger Stadium? We might not be able to go again."
The Dodgers? Ed! Eduardo! Eddie boy! Is this about baseball? Dude, the quarantine in California, even there, had only been going on about a month. You went from content family man with a good job, a house, a wife, and 2 kids, to crazy engineer trying to ram a Navy boat with his train? Ed, you are not alright. You need a therapist, man. Holy crap. So what happened to Eduardo? Where is he now? Well, he's still in custody. His trial did occur and he wound up pleading guilty to train wrecking. His sentencing actually hasn't happened yet. It's scheduled for next month. According to sources, the prosecutors are going to ask for 6 years in prison as a result of what he did. And I think that's a slap on the wrist, all things considered. Because like I said, this isn't so different from someone trying to bomb a regular hospital. Just because he failed at it, and probably wouldn't have been able to succeed, doesn't mean he didn't attempt to do something that could have been very horrific. Like, he clearly could have hurt somebody. What if he was in charge of a passenger train or anything? Like, honestly, 6 years just doesn't cut it for me. I've heard of people getting more time for, like, tax evasion or something, and that is so not on the same level as I tried to slam a train into the USNS Mercy because I felt like it. Oh well, till next time, this is Darkness. I bid you all a fond farewell.